Hi everyone, it's Scott Allen, and welcome to Let's Talk Rugby. We're brought to you by theraw.com.au, Australia's largest sports opinion website. Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to be talking about the Wallabies' performance in the match against the All Blacks, where the Wallabies need to improve as they embark on their end-of-year tour, any possible team changes for the match against England, and then we'll do a short preview of what we can expect from England. So, joining me on the panel today, I've got Brett McKay from The Raw, who most of you will know. Obviously writes about rugby, but also cricket, and seems to be writing for most publications these days. You'll also probably know him as one of the main presenters on the Cheap Seats podcast. Brett, you're a busy man.
Anyone who'll have me, Scott. Yeah, I'm well though, mate. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, that's good. Look forward to it. And also joining us from the UK is Dan Cottrill, who is the editor at Better Rugby Coaching. His publications include International Rugby Coaching and Rugby Coach Weekly. If anyone is an aspiring coach, I have subscribed to both of these publications and have always found them very useful in my coaching career. How are you, Dan?
Yes, good, thanks. And, good evening to you, and it's good morning here from a sunny Wales.
All right, well, look, let's get into rugby and have a bit of a talk about the things we need to this week. And the first area I want to talk about is the Wallabies' performance against the All Blacks, but really leading out of that, areas that they need to improve. And the first point I want to talk about is the restarts. And if you go all the way back to the third test in the Lions series and you think about first kick-off of the game, Will Genia drops the ball. And, that had a major impact on the match. And then in this last match we saw against New Zealand, the first 5 times that the Wallabies scored any points, the All Blacks kicked to them. So we just built some momentum and we got turned over at the restart. To me, it appears that we've got a bit of a positioning problem, and that players on the ground aren't in the right position, aren't reacting quickly enough to where the ball's going. There appears to be a lack of confidence between each other, as in calling as to it's mine or it's yours. Maybe there's a lot of calling going on that it's yours. And I think then what's happening is the players are having to make last-minute adjustments, and that leads to drop ball. But, Brett, I see that happening in kicks in general play as well. What about you? What are you seeing?
Oh, absolutely, mate. I think you're spot on. If we go back to the restarts for now, especially against New Zealand, I made the observation afterwards that numerous times it looked like any time that the Wallabies had reception pods, if you like, positioned, they were always right out on the touchline, and we often found that it was blokes like Ben McCallum and Michael Hooper who were left infield but isolated, and that's where New Zealand kicked to, and so they're being completely outdone in the contest, whereas the blokes that are getting ready with a lifter to try and catch it are left out on the sideline with nothing to do. The other thing I said was that the Wallabies plan for restarts for contesting restarts seemed to be whether or not Israel Folau could get there, and if he could, then he went for it. If they didn't, they just stayed on the ground and let New Zealand have it. And so I don't know how many restarts there were in that game, but it felt like New Zealand won 80% of them. I don't know what the actual number was. So it then goes into catching kicks in general play, like you say, and the positioning, as you say, is absolutely spot on. I think a lot of that still comes from the fact that Israel Folau is still learning how to play fullback in rugby, as opposed to just being one of the outside backs in rugby league. So his positioning in general isn't quite what it could be. Adam Ashley Cooper hasn't played wing for a little while, so he's probably still a little bit rusty there. And then on the other wing, it's been a bit of a revolving door. There's been James O'Connor, there's been Peter Booth, and most recently Joe Tamani in there as well. So I just think the general positioning and general cohesiveness, combinations, if you like, is just a bit out. So maybe there is a lot of calling yours, like you say.
Yeah. And look, another area that I think, and it's obvious to everybody, the Wallabies defence. And if you look back at the last 8 matches, including the third and final Lions test, the Wallabies are conceding over 31 points per match. To me, they appear slow to assess situations. So if you think back into that Bledisloe 3 game, Israel Dagg switched from one side of the field to the other. The Wallabies had numbers, but they were slow to get their fast men onto that side to cover Dagg. By the time he got across there, Stephen Moore, he was probably already beaten, and then a fullback on a hooker, it's always going to be a one-sided contest. But Israel Folau was slow coming across. If you think about the cross kick that Cruden made for Sevilla, I mean, Ashley Cooper had to start in fairly narrow, but I thought what happened was, the ball had been kicked and he was still moving infield. Then he had to turn and chase backwards. Their organisation just doesn't seem right. Brett, what do you got? You got any thoughts on this?
No, I completely agree with you, mate. I think their alignment on first phase is okay, but where they're getting in trouble, and it was throughout the Rugby Championship, this was the case. They were consistently getting into trouble on in second phase and subsequent phase after that. And the Israel Dag example you just used is a classic example. You could go back to the first couple of Bledisloes when James O'Connor was seemingly found out of position, but it was more often than not it was the covering forwards coming over, not reacting quick enough. And I think James Hall was one that you pointed out at the time. Again, it's whether it's a communication thing in defence, whether it's a general cohesion, combinations or anything like that. I don't know. I'm not quite sure what the answer is, but there's the questions keep getting asked about, what's going on here? What's going on in terms of the defence coach, and I think a lot of work still needs to be done there.
Yeah, and Dan, the Wallabies have been playing against New Zealand and South Africa, obviously, who are, both playing very well, number 1 and 2 in the world. And they're playing a very fast, up-tempo game. You think that's making it harder for the Wallabies to defend against?
I think it's making much harder for the Wallabies to defend against, and I think you've got to look at the ruck efficiency. In New Zealand's last game against South Africa, they won 100% of their rucks, and they're winning them quickly. It is very difficult for these defensive boys to get themselves back into place, and any small error, any moment of miscommunication is going to be exploited. And people like Israel Dag, they move so quickly from blind to open or open to blind that one player slightly out of position and the moment's gone. Again, I think that Australia will be much better in this tour and as the tour unfolds, because the sides just won't have that same quick ruck efficiency, and therefore the players will be getting themselves into place. And as Brett keeps alluding to, the cohesion will grow as the tour goes on. So I think they will be much stronger.
All right, but move on to another point, and that is, in my view, and I think most people's view, the Wallabies forwards, the physicality just hasn't been there. I think they've been getting monstered by the All Blacks and the Springboks. And, that has a direct impact on what the Wallabies are trying to do in attack. They've been talking a lot about playing a more expansive game. And, look, I personally think we're seeing some good results from Cooper having big ball runners outside him. So, I think Kurandrani's developing really well, and Folau as well. That's giving Cooper some really good targets. So I can see how the game plan can be built around those sorts of players a little bit wider. I also like the two-player setup, and I thought Tamua's combination with Cooper in that last match was really good. But none of that matters if we can't control the contact areas. So, I thought the Wallaby forwards in that last match were getting bashed around when they were carrying the ball. They certainly weren't winning the breakdown, and their defence was really passive. They were getting carried back over the line. Brett, do you think the Wallabies can keep playing that expansive game plan, particularly when we get to the wetter climates of the Northern Hemisphere autumn?
I think they'll need to rein it in a bit, but I think their instinct will be to attack wherever they can. Yeah. If you go back to the Rosario game, and there was Cooper had a lot of success drawing Joe Tamani and Folau in off his inside hip, and I think we'll see a lot more of that, and particularly this weekend at Twickenham if it is a little bit damp, like Dan's suggesting. I don't think we're going to quite see that classic dry track sort of a game for most of this tour, and I do think we will see a lot more of the inside runners. But I think the intent is always going to be there. I think that's just the way Mackenzie likes to play the game, and that's fair enough. That's probably what we want to see as Wallaby supporters. Your point about the breakdown is key to this. Again, in Rosario, they were able to play that way because they were getting quick ball, and a guy like Scott Fardy was absolutely crucial into that. And I think him not being there in Dunedin the following week in the third Bledisloe was a really big absence. They didn't get that same momentum because they just didn't have that his same presence. They didn't have that same impact, if you like, from the back rows that were there. So they're absolutely going to need to do that if they do want to be able to play a little bit of ball in hand. So the simple answer is yes, because they have to.
Okay. Well, now let's talk Wallabies selections. And Brett, you mentioned there Scott Fardy. We know he's available. Are you expecting that he'll come into the team and start? And if so, is it McCalman or is it Moen, or who might he replace?
It's probably a toss of a coin there, if I'm perfectly honest, mate. I think Fardy has to come back in, and I think he has to come straight back in to blindside. I know there's a little bit of temptation to move him to lock, and I've even heard suggestion of him playing at number 8, which I think would be a little bit out of the box. I'd be putting him straight back in at number 6 because I think that's been a strength while he's been there. He just seems to have been getting better each game. Whether it's McCalman or Moen at 8, it's a really difficult one. I'm a big admirer of Ben Moen as a player. I think the way he's lifted his game in the last 18 months has been a real credit to him. Having taken on the advice that he has and taken his game to different levels. But there's no denying that he just hasn't had that same impact in this part of the season as he was against the Lions. And again, when he went to blindside against New Zealand in Dunedin, he just didn't have that same impact that he did against the Lions at blindside. So maybe McCalman has done enough to hold his spot. They're very similar players, I think, and McCalman's been pretty strong at number 8 all year for the Force. So I don't know that we're necessarily losing much at the moment there. It's a difficult one. It will be very interesting to see what happens, but I'll be very surprised if Fardy's not starting straight away.
Yeah, look, I agree. I'm sure Fardy will start. And look, and I've made it clear on the articles I've written in the site that I think the forwards have got to lift, and in particular, Hall and Moen are the two that have to lift more than any others. But to be honest, I can't see Link tossing out either of his two leaders. So I think they'll be there. I think Fardy will go to 6 and Moen will go back to 8. And unless we see somebody like a McCalman coming off the bench and having a storming game, I think Link will probably be looking for a little bit of consistency in the selections. So we'll see there. We know that Pelota now isn't available, and the reason being that he hasn't had a full week in training, so he's not going to be an option. Can you see any other changes in the forward pack, Brett?
Not really, I don't think. There'll be debate about whether Sidaleki Tamani should start or whether it should be Simmons. I've actually been pretty impressed with Simmons for the last couple of games, so I don't think it's a bad thing that he starts. And in fact, if Simmons does start, then maybe that is the option to start McCalman at 8, because you've got to have Simmons or Moen on the field to run the line out, and they run the respective line outs for the Reds and the Brumbies. So it's got to be one or the other. I don't think you can drop Moen and Simmons then at the same time, because Hall certainly just doesn't have the same impact at line out time. So I'd expect Simmons to go there. I think you're absolutely right about Hall. He's got it. He needs a really big month, I think, in Europe to just to keep the sniping critics at bay. The less we write about him, the better, I think. But I think he's been a little bit off his game a bit in the last month. So, but I'm not expecting any real change.
All right, so talking backline now, I mean, I guess the first one would be, is Matt Tamua going to retain his position at 12, or do you think Christian Lealifano will come straight back in?
Yeah, again, this is possibly another flip of the coin, but Matt Tamua might have a bit of an edge in not so much in the goal kicking stakes, but in his tactical kicking. The Brumbies all throughout the year were able to play that territory-based game because of the tactical kicking of Nick White and Tamua particularly. They went to Jesse Mogg when they needed a bit of distance, but when they really needed to drive into the corners, it was Matt Tamua doing that. And Cooper can still play that wide game if he wants to, but Tamua has just got that ability to straighten up and to turn the English defenders around if they need to. So I think Tamua does hold his spot for the moment. Yeah,
look, I agree. And the kicking is a good point. I hadn't really thought about that. But what I really liked about the combination was Link has made it very clear that he wants to have a point of difference for the Wallabies being the two playmaker structure. And I just thought Tamua worked in that role so much better than Lealifano has so far. Not to say that it can't work in the future, but it was a really good combination between the two of them. So many times you saw Tamua not just getting in as a first receiver, but actually being the playmaker and directing things. When Cooper was on one side of the field or in the ruck or wherever he may be, Tamua really stepped up and took control. And I know the trend in World Rugby has been, to go to the Big 12 and maybe the smaller and more skillful 13, but I think I can see where Link's going. And Brett, I guess the only other spot that I'm looking at in the back line is, do Nick Cummins or Joe Tamani come in onto the wing ahead of Peter Beetham?
I think the answer is yes, but then you're going to ask me which one, aren't you?
Well, I'll tell you which one.
All right.
It's got to be the Honey Badger, just because of the way he played against England at Twickenham last year, probably his best test match he's played.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that, mate. And either Cummins or Tamani can both play that same hard-running, off Cooper's hip game that it's Digby Ioane. That's essentially the game we're talking about. So Cummins probably plays that as good as anyone. Tamani had a really good end to his season playing that same role. But if Cummins is fit, I think I'm going his way as well.
Yeah. And Brett, it's not an opportunity for revenge when we're playing England, is it? After what happened in the Lions?
Oh, it's always an opportunity for revenge. Scott, come on, mate. I do understand his sentiment. Maybe we'll save up the revenge when we play out Wales in Cardiff.
So England have got 3 matches in successive weeks. Wallabies this weekend, obviously, Argentina, and then finish with New Zealand. One of the good things for me about England is that they're wearing white jerseys, not that grey from 2010 and that absolutely horrible purple.
That was a terrible colour last year.
Absolutely. But I guess, as we've all touched on already, a number of injuries for England, including 3 of their Lions representatives. They've announced a 23-man squad, but not the starting team yet. We know that the scrum battle is going to be vital, and I'm sure that the Wallabies and probably Ben Alexander in particular are secretly quite happy that Alex Corbuzero's out. Dan, we also know that Jeff Parling's out, got a concussion in training. What does that mean, having those 2 key forwards out for the pack?
I think it's quite important. For me, the first point for both coaches is how cohesive will the teams be. And this is something we've mentioned already. And I just think this is where the Australians are going to have the edge. They've been playing together for a long time. They've been in camp, whereas Stuart Lancaster quite rightly said they've had very little time in camp together, and they certainly haven't had a chance to give themselves a run out. I mean, if you've got to have a run out and your first game's up against New Zealand or Australia or South Africa, that's quite a tough ask. And okay, so Ewan McKenzie's had the same thing, but he's also had a chance to play against Argentina, and Argentina are no mugs, but they're not South Africa and New Zealand. So he's had a chance to create that cohesive nature, pull the players together. And for England, without players who've played in the structure for a while, like Corbicero and Parling, that's quite important. I think Brett certainly mentioned earlier on about not having leaders on the pitch, and that's why players like Horwell will be selected. Well, Parling's quite a leader, and they've marked him down as a potential future England captain, perhaps. So I think that's quite a big blow for the side. I just wonder whether the new scrummaging laws have not necessarily suited someone like Corbicero. He is a powerful scrummager, but how much did he benefit from the fact that there was a hit and chase? And how much does he have to adjust with the new laws? I know that loose heads have probably come out a little bit better off from the new laws. I'm yet to be convinced that some of these top scrummagers from, say, last year are still causing the same amount of problems this year. Yeah. So overall, I think it's advantage Australia from those injuries.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, because I know I looked a lot at Corbicero and his scrummaging before the 3rd test last in the Lions series, and my impression was that he missed the hit a lot, but that he was very powerful once he'd missed the hit and been beaten. He's very powerful at coming back through. So I had expected that the new laws would actually help him, but I guess we're not going to see in the international matches until the following week. But there is one other forward I wanted to get your thoughts on, because all the word seems to be that Billy Vunipola, Mako's younger brother will play at number 8. He's 20, isn't he? And he's only 6'2", but he comes in at nearly 130 kilos, doesn't he? He's a bit of a monster.
It's the little brother.
Well, I mean, the thing is that, first of all, England lacked a strong ball carrier for most of the Six Nations. As soon as Ben Morgan got injured, they were struggling. And Morgan hasn't been on form, so I would suggest that Vunipola starts. But the other thing is that he plays off his brother. So in the Premiership games, it's often Vunipola to Vunipola. And either one, you don't want to be setting up. There's no way that Quaid can step to one side and let someone else take it, because he might get the other one in return. So I think that England will be much better going forward when they've got both the Vunipola brothers on the pitch, and that will be quite a handful for any defence.
Dan, I'm a little bit disappointed. You obviously haven't done your research. There were some stats out recently that Quade Cooper's defence is better than Richie McCaw's. Believe it or not, well, as Ripley would say.
Yeah, but you have to, joking apart, I mean, Quade Cooper's defence has improved, and I know that they've been working really hard on it. However, there's a little thing in rugby about making tackles and taking tackles, and I think Quade doesn't chase around looking for tackles where Richie does, so he might miss a few because he makes that extra effort. I think when people run at Quade Cooper, they literally run at him and try to run over him, so he's quite good as a roadblock, and he has improved. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I don't think he's going chasing around to make that big hit and maybe miss that big hit. So, yes, fair enough on the stats.
You watch him sit Big Billy down on his backside on the weekend. And then we'll wake up and realise it was all a dream. Anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
So I guess the other thing with the England side, look, I think this has got even more impact, is that Tuilagi and Barrett, who I think would have been your starting centres, are out. And I think Tuilagi is probably the biggest loss, because England last year were playing with him providing so much of the go forward. And if you think about that game against the All Blacks, he was a central player. Dan, who's going to replace the two of them? And does it mean that England are going to have to play a slightly different game without Tuilagi's power running in midfield?
I don't think there's any doubt they will have to play a slightly different game. Looking at the 23, it seems likely that it will be Owen Farrell at 10, Billy 12 Trees at 12, and Joel Tompkins at 13. So that gives you a Saracens connection with a Gloucester boy in between them, and that's probably quite a good combination, because connections in the midfield are very, very important. But Tompkins isn't Tuilagi. He's a big boy. He's a good offloader. He's a good defender. 12 Trees is a good playmaker. Probably like Australia, they want a bit of a playmaker in a 12. I just don't think they've got the same impact at the moment as the Barrett-Tuilagi combination. But they are good ball players. So I think there will be a slight difference. Perhaps the wingers might see the ball a little more, because Barrett and Tuilagi are not great fans of passing the ball.
All right, well, let's talk prospects. I mean, in getting ready for this, I went back and watched some of the matches last year, and England had a really mixed sort of 12-month period. You know, they started out with it's disrespectful to say it was a warm-up game, but certainly they had a game before they played Australia, beat Fiji. Obviously, then they were beaten by the Wallabies, and then a close loss to South Africa. But then they came out and looked so good against New Zealand last year. And then, look, I thought they had a pretty good Six Nations before getting well and truly belted by Wales in the decider. And when I look at a number of those matches, and I also looked at the 2010 game between England and Australia, and in that game, England won comfortably. But I got the impression in that game they were playing in a very positive manner. They really went after Australia that day. Last year, when they played Australia, everything seemed to be a lot tighter. It was a far more conservative approach. And yet, when they came out and played the All Blacks 2 weeks later, again, it was that very positive approach. And then when we got to the decider of the Six Nations, again, I saw the very conservative approach. What do you think we can expect this time, Dan? Is Stuart Lancaster a coach that is a more conservative coach, or is he going to be, revving the guys up to be as positive as they were against New Zealand?
I think Stuart Lancaster is a sort of coach who looks ahead. He's very, very positive. He wants to play rugby. He wants the players to express themselves. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He's not. I don't think he's like this Heineken Mayer or Project White. He wants to play some rugby. I think that when England stepped on the field against Wales, they lost the game as soon as the Welsh crowds stood up and started singing, because that Welsh side had so much momentum behind them. They didn't play very well at all in the Six Nations. They played one good game, and that was against England. England, by the time they got to Wales, were not playing as well. They'd lost the momentum. A couple of key players were not on top of their game. A couple of key players weren't there. So England need a few Totans on the field to give them that bit of go forward. I just wonder if the lack of Parling, Corbacero, and perhaps a very fit Ben Morgan is going to be something they're going to miss. Rugby's so much about momentum. You mentioned right at the start about Will Genia dropping that kick in that final test. If he'd caught it, whacked the ball down the field. I mean, the Lions played that first half in the third test. They were rubbish. So it is about momentum. I really couldn't tell you what England's side will step out onto the field. It'll be like the first session in the Ashes test, really. That first 20 minutes will tell you a lot about where England are. I think Stuart is positive. He will want to try and play some rugby. The weather will make a big difference. And I couldn't tell you whether England are a wet weather team or not at the moment. They seem to play a bit better when the conditions are a bit damper, perhaps.
All right, and have you got a tip for us, Dan? You prepared to go on a limb, not knowing the team, not knowing the weather?
I would, wearing no hat at all, I would say that Australia have definitely got the advantage for this one.
Oh, jeez, look out.
And Brett, what do you see coming from the match, and then finish it off with your tip?
Yeah, look, I think Dan's just nailed it down there pretty well. Go back to last year, and the Wallabies really came out firing, and whether that had an impact on the way England wanted to play the game or not, I don't know. But you always had the feeling that England sort of were playing catch-up rugby. And the last probably 45, 50 minutes of that game last year was almost like a game of chess. Neither team really fired a shot, and in the end, it was essentially the first try that decided the game. I don't know that either team can afford to do that this year, this time around. I think they both are going to need to try and outplay the other one rather than just keep track. So, for their own confidence level, if you like, the Wallabies need to keep going on what they've built up in Rosario and Dunedin, even though they lost the last Bledisloe. So they need to keep playing that positive intent like they have been. England, I think, need to start laying a bit of a foundation for the Six Nations next year, because they're going to go into that probably favourites again, and they're not going to be wanting to go in off a pretty ordinary autumn internationals as I'll call it. So I don't think either team can really afford to lose. I'd like to think Australia's combinations and cohesiveness over the last 3 or 4 weeks might be the edge in the end. So if it's 1 point, I'll be quite happy. If it's 10, I'll be over the moon.
Good. Yeah. Well, for me, it's about the intent of how the game's played. I mean, I've really enjoyed the way the Wallabies have been attempting to play the last 2 matches, and I hope that continues. I think that the fact that England have just been in training camp and haven't really played with their main team since March, and the Wallabies, they've been playing every couple of weeks in the last month, and have come off, pretty good performances in those last 2 matches. I think that might just give Australia the edge.
So that brings us to the end of this episode. I've included Twitter addresses for each of us if you want to get in touch, but I'll also include some website addresses on the page. In terms of TV, this weekend, Channel 10 and Fox 2 have both got the game live, starting at 1:30am Eastern Daylight Saving Time.
So let me just say, Dan, thanks very much for coming on, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
And Brett, thanks very much.
No problems at all, mate. Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to us. You'll be able to catch an episode of Let's Talk Rugby on the Raw every week during the end-of-year tour for the Wallabies.